All right, so delighted to have you with us as we continue our exploration into leadership, because leadership matters. I call these calls Leadership Matters calls because leadership matters. Delighted to have you with us. If you can show us your face, if you can come off of, if you turn your video on, it'd be great. If not, that's perfectly okay, but prefer to see you, as leadership is a relationship endeavor. So we're going to be talking today about getting the right people onto your team. How many of you, please put a yes in the chat if this is you, how many of you have ever had an experience where you brought somebody onto your team, either in real estate or some other part of some other business you've been in? You brought somebody onto the team who turned out to be not the right fit in the long term, and you either had to let that person go or that person chose to leave because the fit wasn't right. Just put a yes in the chat if you've ever had that experience. So for most of us, it's a challenge to have the right kinds of things happening when somebody's on a team. Part of that is due to how we communicate and how we lead and how we've organized the business and that kind of stuff. Part of it is due to the innate nature of the person who is the person that you brought on board. I like to encourage teams to think about, when you bring somebody onto a team or you align yourself with someone closely for your business, it's kind of like a marriage. You're saying, I'm committing to a deep relationship with this person, which is going to have large consequences in the success of my life, or at least my business, over a long period of time. And I'd like you to consider what we're talking about today, not just if you're going to bring an agent on, although that's what most people first think of when they're thinking about expanding a team, but what we're talking about also applies to any team member that you might eventually hire or work with, and even vendors that you might work closely with. If you make a commitment to a single lender or an escrow person or an inspection person or a lawyer, or whoever it might be, that person has some kind of an impact on your business. And of course, you want to have someone that you work closely with. And more broadly in our lives, we work with doctors and lawyers and accountants and other people who help us, create the life or the business that we want to create. In all these cases, you've chosen to align yourself with someone else in a significant way over the long term, with the intention that it's going to pay off for you down the line. Fair enough to say? Well, if you bring somebody on board and the person turns out to be not the right fit, of course, you not only lose the potential value that you were looking to get out of the relationship, you've wasted a lot of time and maybe money making that whole process happen. And, we've seen so many, unfortunately, sad stories of people bringing somebody on, especially agents, who did good production somewhere else, and that's about as far as their kind of due diligence goes in hiring somebody. Oh, she did this last year with such and such a team, she'll kill it with us. And so you throw her the offer and she joins the team, and for whatever reason, maybe it doesn't work out perfectly later on. What I'd like to do is share a few things with you today to think about before you bring somebody on, so that you make sure that you're bringing on the right person, because I want you to bring on the person who's right for you today and right for you over the long term. So I have a number of slides I'll go through and we'll talk about them. And today's conversation is part of a longer one, which we'll have over the next 3 or 4 calls, about getting the right people onto your team. So what we want to think about today is the very first part of this, which is, how do you make sure that you're thinking about the right kind of person to add to your team? You may be a good interviewer, you may be a good spotter of talent, but if you don't have a clear image in your mind, if you're not able to translate that image of what's right for your team into your conversations with that person, you're quite likely to get somebody who might not be ideal. So let's pull this up. We'll go through. I've got 8 or 9 slides here. I know it's a little bit information dense, but we'll talk through it here and let's see how it goes. My hope is that you'll come up with something out of the call today, that's something maybe you hadn't really thought of or hadn't given much much thought to, that might help you think a little more deeply about who might be right for you in the future. So, who is right for your team? It's a fundamental question, and it's something that you will absolutely rue the day if you don't give enough thought to it at the very beginning. Why does this matter? Because the most important rule of effective teaming is the first rule. And that first rule of effective teaming is, get the right people on the team. If you have the right people on the team, it doesn't matter if they don't have perfect skills, they can learn them. Doesn't matter if they don't have perfect experience, they can gain it. But if you have the wrong people on the team, it doesn't really matter what their past skills or experience are. If they're not the right fit for you for some other reason, they're not reliable, they're not accountable, they share inappropriate information or something, then in the long run, you're going to lose. So the first rule of effective teaming always is get the right people onto the team in the first place. So what is recruiting? We talk about recruiting people a lot, but if I were to ask you, what's your definition of recruiting? I kind of get a blank stare when I ask this of team leaders that I coach here at CSC. So here's a simple definition of what recruiting is all about. It's a planned and purposeful process. You've heard Chirag talk about that before. Planned and purposeful process of clarifying the right kind of partner or employee and bringing potential candidates into the orbit of your business. So there's two parts here. There's the part about clarifying who the right kind of partner is. That's what we're talking about today. And then in the next couple of conversations, we'll talk about bringing potential candidates into the orbit of your business. Now, this is kind of broad. It's stated in a broad way, but I want you to think about this not just in terms of an agent you might bring on, but an employee or maybe even a vendor. So how do we clarify the right kind of person for the business? Well, there's a lot of things to consider, but I'm going to suggest just a few that are important for you to make sure that you're clear about so that you don't overlook one of these elements. First, to think about who might be right, you need to think first about your own team's values and beliefs. That is, what do we value here? What are our fundamental beliefs as a business? Because anybody that you bring on who's going to be successful has to share a willingness to approach business that way. Secondly, what are our team's work practices? How do we do business every day? How do we meet with each other? How do we share information? How do we pass things off from one of us to the other of us? Or how do we pass a client from one person to another person, depending on the situation? It's really important to be clear about what role you want the person to play. Very often that's pretty clear in your mind. Probably out of the four of these, that's probably the most clear. And number four, what skills and experience would be valuable? In other words, if you're saying, I want this person to perform this kind of a role, then it would be useful if this person had either these skills and or this experience. But if you overlook any of these questions, chances are you're going to miss something that's going to come back to bite you in the end. If the person you think of hiring or end up hiring is not in alignment with your values and beliefs, that's going to show up over time, and it's going to be a negative circumstance, unfortunately. Work practices, absolutely. You have a certain way of doing business, you have certain processes, checklists, whatever they are. You need to make sure that everybody wants to follow them. Remember how I defined team in a previous call? A team is defined as a group of people with a common goal and a common approach to business success. That's what we're talking about with the second bullet point here. So what are values and beliefs? Just a quick kind of refresher on this page about what values and beliefs are. I think we've covered this in a previous call, but in case you forgot, here it is again. Values typically are principles. They're typically one word, like integrity or service or professionalism or community or responsiveness or innovation, right? One word concepts that run through what your business does. They're different from beliefs, kind of related, but a little bit different. Beliefs are viewpoints that we hold. They typically are a phrase or a sentence. For example, there's a perfect home for every client, or collaborate without ego. Those 8 CEPs that are part of Compass's culture, collaborate without ego, learn from reality, etc. Those are beliefs. Essentially, Compass says, we believe it's good for business when we collaborate without ego. We believe it's good for business when we learn from reality. And what they're saying to every Compass agent is, we want you to follow these as guidelines as to how you need to do whatever you do on a daily basis. And if you can follow these guidelines, we believe we'll be successful. That's the philosophy that Compass has. So they're quite prominent with the beliefs, less so with the values. But on your particular team, you could have some values. You might have beliefs. You might not. It's okay. You don't have to have both. But you have to be clear about what this is for you. Our team's work practices. So this is the second bullet on that previous slide. What are work practices? Well, there are a whole bunch of things. Our meeting and communication habits. How often do we meet? What way do we meet? Do we meet in person? Do we meet virtually, etc.? How do we share texts? That kind of thing. Decision-making styles. Who decides what? How much authority and autonomy are you going to give to this person that you bring onto your team? If you're not clear about that in the beginning and you can't communicate that clearly with the prospective person, they may come in with a different understanding or expectation of what they're going to get from you. What about extracurricular activities? Do you do a lot of events or not? Do you have some commitment to a local charity or not? Do you do other things in your in your community that is something about how you do business. It's not business itself. Record keeping. How do you manage your CRM? How important is that to you? How about business tracker? Do you track everything? Do you create action steps for everything or not? Where are you on that kind of everyday practice? That you need to be clear about. And finally, sharing work. What happens when somebody's sick? What happens when somebody's on vacation? What happens if there's some other unexpected event like that? How do you handle that? These are the kinds of things that you need to be clear about in your own mind so that you can communicate them clearly to the other. And then once you do that, you can see what that person's perspective is. But if you don't communicate this stuff clearly to the other person, you're kind of assuming that the other person is going to have the same approach that you do. And I can almost assure you that whatever's in your head is not what's in their head. Even if they've been successful, even if they've been in business a long time, I'm almost certain that what's in their head about how to do business, what's right to do business, is different from how you see it. So those are some things for you to clarify before you even start talking to somebody. Next, what is the role? What are the expectations that you have about this particular person's participation in the business? And you can write them down on black and white. I don't suggest you do this in your head. I suggest you write it down, like have a written job description or written action steps that you want this person to be engaging in on a regular basis. Mutual accountabilities. Mutual accountabilities are the accountabilities that run in both directions in any kind of a relationship. So this person may be accountable to you for XYZ, like showing up at the team meeting every Tuesday. But what's the accountability that you have to that person? Maybe that person would expect that you would meet him or her because it's a relatively new agent to do some mentoring and guidance once every week or once every 2 weeks. That might be something that you're accountable to for that person. This is something that you want to think about ahead of time. What are you willing to be accountable for? And then you explore that with that person. What are the turf lines or boundaries? So what are the things you want this person to be involved in? But just as importantly, what do you want this person not to be involved in? So for example, if you hire an agent, how are you going to handle marketing? Are you going to allow that person to come up with his or her own marketing ideas? Or do you have a marketing person who will do that or use somebody at Compass? That's something for you to be clear about. And finally, how will you support the role? So these are things that you need to think about beforehand so that you can have a useful conversation with that person about all of these. Next, relevant skills and experience. So given whatever you've spec'd out that role to be, what are the skills and experience that you would like the person to have? And you could divide this into 2 different categories if you want. One would be absolutely must-have skills or experience, and nice-to-haves. When we hire somebody, nobody's ever a perfect fit for everything that we want. And so there's always some level of compromise in there. But if you simply identify the skills or experience, which are must-have and nice-to-have, and you could do it in a simple grid, right? You could do like a skills category, must-have, nice-to-have, and then an experience category, must-have, nice-to-have. You just have 4 boxes, and you could just fill it in, and you'd have a pretty good idea of what you're looking for there. Of course, it has to tie to your concept of what the role is. So once you clarify what the role is, then it's easier for you to fill in what these skills or experience might be. Now, the things that are nice-to-haves, if the person doesn't have it, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to develop this person and teach this person? Or do I need to have this person go to, CSC coaching or some other kind of coaching or something like that to help them develop those skills? Those are questions that should come up for you very early in the game. What we find, unfortunately, is that most team leaders don't consider any of these things until after they've talked to somebody and even after they've hired somebody. And so then we come up with, a person, the gaps in this kind of experience that we would like them to have or the knowledge that we would like them to have. And we have to deal with it and clean it up and fix it to make the person useful to us. The last thing you want to do is approach all of these questions and create and clarify your own answers after you've already hired the person. Could you imagine marrying somebody and spending the rest of your life with somebody without ever having talking with them ahead of time? Their ideas about trust and faith and loyalty and discipline or whatever, right? If you had to find out all of that stuff afterwards, it might be a little bit of a rocky marriage. Unfortunately, that's what happens far too often in business. So what's some action that you can take this week? Whoops. Okay. So what's some action you can take this week? Well, to just get yourself started, even if you don't have somebody right now that you're really looking for, if you're not in the market for somebody at this particular moment, you can ask yourself some of these questions anyway. when the time is right for me to align myself with another. Now, you see, I kind of had a strange phrase there, align myself with another. Again, I want you to think about this, not just in terms of hiring an agent, but perhaps any team member or even a vendor that you'll work closely with or some other kind of a partner, even somebody who you work with on gifts. Maybe, you want to work with gifts, or maybe even your AEM at Compass. All these things kind of fit for any kind of person that you're going to bring into the business. You can ask yourself these 4 questions right now. What values and beliefs would I like this person to be aligned with? That doesn't matter what the job is. That doesn't matter when the time is right. That's a fundamental aspect of the core of your business. What do you base your business on? So that first question you can ask yourself today or anytime. Second, what work practices would I need to discuss with this person? Same thing. You know what your work practices are. The other person doesn't. You can't assume that he or she understands what they are or agrees with what they are. But you need to write down what they are. And they were on that previous slide, how we meet with each other, how we make decisions, etc. And then if you start thinking more specifically about who you might bring on, then you need to ask yourself these last 2 questions. What role would I want this person to play? And what skills or experience would suit this person to the work that needs to be done? So these are 4 questions that you should be asking yourself before you even talk to a likely candidate. The first 2 you should certainly be able to think about right now, whether you're thinking of bringing on somebody in the next week or the next month or even 5 years from now. And the last 2 you can think of in a more targeted way when the specific need arises. So let me pull this down and talk about this a little bit. Okay. So thinking about all of that, I'm curious, what is an item in there that kind of resonates for you that you need to think a little bit more about, or you need to make sure you keep in mind as you consider the growth of your business over time? And feel free to take yourself off of mute. There's only a few of us, so let's have a little discussion here. We don't have to do this through the chat. So Martha, what comes up for you, for example, when you think this through? What's kind of resonating for you in your mind?
To be honest with you, all of it. I think I have a little bit of PTSD, to be honest with you, because I thought I had started to develop this perfect team and had these 2 really great new agents that had, the same work style I did. They didn't have a lot of experience, but they were just a really good fit. And then one by one, they left. I mean, they just couldn't make it during COVID or whatever. But I can see that, I think I do give thought to, all your points, but I think I need to be a little bit more clear about how I convey that to somebody, and maybe be a little bit more structured in my approach when I talk to somebody about bringing them in, and maybe even clearer in my own head a little bit before I bring them in.
Yeah, thank you. The first step always is clarity in your own mind. If you don't have clarity in your own mind, guaranteed that lack of clarity is going to flow downstream to somewhere else in your business. And it's going to pop up as a problem. And it could be a little problem, could be a big problem. But when you're talking about the people, that's the biggest part of your business. Remember that your business is nothing more than a collection of people. And it's a collection of relationships, and how they relate together, how they share the work together is the determiner of the success of your business. And so, there's not much we can do about, the pandemic. Those things happened and tons of businesses really struggled at that time. But going forward, it does absolutely benefit our business when we're absolutely clear first, and then we think about how we communicate this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that guidance.
Yep. Stacy or Kelly, I'd like to hear from you. What's coming up for you as you think through this that we're discussing? Kelly, you still there? If you are, you're on mute and we can't hear you. Same for Stacy. We're going to be talking next week. We're going to give you a kind of a worksheet that you can use next week with some more questions on it and some more things to think about as you kind of drill down on this. But this is the starting point. You need to think about the business as a long-term going concern, which is really nothing more than a collection of people who are in relationship with each other. And in thinking about your values, thinking about your beliefs, what you're thinking about is the core ideas or perspectives that tie all of you together. And so when you're thinking about the role itself and the skills and knowledge necessary, you're thinking more specifically about a particular function or a particular kind of input into the business. And so all of these things are important. There are others too. I mean, this is not intended to be the only thing that you need to think about. But what I've seen coaching so many team leaders is that these are the things that consistently get overlooked to one degree or another. Maybe they're only half clarified in our mind, or maybe we didn't have good conversations about it. So often we just default to the simplest thing, which is, oh, I heard of somebody over there through my, AEM or somebody, and that person did pretty good production last year, and I'll bring that person over and I'll just plug her or him in, and bingo, it's like no skin off my back, and suddenly I'll just get another 5 million in sales out of the blue. But it's not that simple. And as leaders, you have to ask yourself, is this process of kind of digging into the right people really something I'm comfortable with and I find easy? Because for many people, it's not natural and easy. You'd much rather focus on the day-to-day business. Especially if you've been in business a long time, you tend to have a routine and you want to kind of do the business every day. But if you're going to bring somebody on, it requires you to step out of that normal kind of habit and practice and spend some time doing some HR stuff. Now, I'll get right with you. And to take this back to like the marriage metaphor, would you jump right into a marriage? Probably not. You'd do some due diligence beforehand. You'd be really thoughtful about what kind of person that you want to spend your life with. And so in that case, you might be quite willing to make an investment in the individual for quite a while before you say, I do. So it's ironic that in business, we're going to tie ourselves together in a sense in the same way. And so many of us just want to jump right into the first person who pops in, something you may never do in a bar or something like that. Martha, please go ahead.
I think those are all very good points, well taken by me at least. But I think the other thing that I've experienced, David, I've talked a couple of times about my most recent experience with the two newer agents, but I've also in the past kind of teamed up with agents that have some experience. And I think those are two completely different things. And from my viewpoint, it was actually easier when they were newer, as long as I could identify that they kind of were very much like me. They wanted to learn, they were very ethical, they had the same beliefs I had. It was kind of nice to train them, and be able to mold them. It was harder with people that had some experience, even if it wasn't as much as experience as I have, because I found two things happen. One was that when they first came in, they were fine with kind of deferring things to me, for lack of a better way to put it. But then as they went along, then we started butting heads a little bit. They felt like I don't know. I think the dynamic is different. I think the ego comes into play more when there's somebody with experience that you bring in. So I think it's a completely different experience that needs to be handled in a different way, at least for me, if I'm bringing in new people versus bringing in somebody with experience.
Yeah, it's another very important question to ask, because your engagement with that person is completely different in those two scenarios. If you're going to bring somebody on who's young, absolutely, hopefully they value learning and growth like you do. I heard two values that you mentioned, learning and ethics. I heard in that last sentence, those are two things that matter to you. And so if you were to go out there and try to find somebody today, you'd want to try to assess whether somebody else cares about learning and ethics like you do. The fact that you're here in all these calls all the time tells me a lot about how committed you are to learning and growth. And so if you're going to bring somebody on who's young, absolutely you have the opportunity to mold them into the way that you like to do business. Of course, it's an investment in your time, and you need to be clear ahead of time how much time you're willing to invest in this person over how many months or years to get this person up to the level that you want him or her to be at. Hopefully it doesn't take so long. Hopefully this person really is excellent and talented and motivated to do that. On the other hand, if you're going to bring on somebody who's experienced, you have the advantage that you may not have to really hold that person's hand, especially if you see they've been successful in the market. And that's where the allure sometimes gets in the way, because we see somebody who's been successful for a number of years and we think, okay, what else matters? She did 5 million last year, or 10 million last year, or 20 million last year. Why wouldn't I bring her on? Well, that's very simplistic thinking, unfortunately, because you need to remember that a team is a system, just like a family is a system. And that means any piece that you introduce into it is going to have like knock-on effects in the rest of the business, right? Like I don't know, ping pong, like balls on a pool table, right? Things bounce off of each other and they affect each other. And so it's not as simple as saying this person did $5 million last year, therefore I'll bring her over here and she'll just inject a magical $5 million into my business. They're coming along with their own beliefs, their own values, their own work style habits. They might not be cooperative. They might not be friendly. They might think that the person that helps them with the transactions works personally for them 24/7. That's a perfect example of them having a particular style or way of doing business that may not be the way you do it. And so if we're only looking at the dollars and cents that we think that they represent, we're shortchanging ourselves, because what really matters over time is the way that we work together. The business success comes through not just their ability to sell and their ability to serve clients and all of that. It's their ability to work successfully with others. And we've all probably seen people in real estate or on sports teams where the person may be talented and capable, but they're really not great at working with other people. And if that's the case, then you really have to be thoughtful about whether this is worth it for you. I can think of countless cases in the sports world where they took a very talented player onto their team and they couldn't win with that person. No matter how talented that person was, there was something about the way he or she screwed things up in the locker room that just didn't work in the system. And so it's important for all of us to recognize that what we're really bringing in is a person that's going to be a member of a system, a part of a system. And we want that piece to be like, fitting like the gears on a machine rather than like throwing the wrench in there and screwing things up.
Very true. Thank you.
Yep. Kelly, I wonder if you have anything you'd like to inject into the conversation. If not, we're going to close. Going once, going twice. Okay, then we're going to close here today. Next week, we're going to continue the conversation, go a little bit further, thinking about how we can begin to figure out how to get people into the room, right? So if we've done the work this week, or we've considered what kind of person do we think we want in our team, how do we start thinking about how to bring that person into the orbit of our organization? Remember, our definition was identifying the right kind of person for the team, and then bringing that person, bringing those likely candidates into the orbit of the organization. So we'll talk more about that over the next session, and we'll have another one after that. So have a great week, everybody. Glad to have you with us. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
Thank you, David.
All right. Bye-bye now.